They say man is a creature who can get used to anything. Dostoevsky wrote that, and maybe right now, without even realizing it. You've gotten used to the most dangerous lie of all, that your life is meant to upgrade hers, even if it means dismantling your own in the process. You know exactly what I mean, because you've lived it. You've poured your energy, your money, your time, your dreams, your very soul, into building a throne for her comfort, while you sat in silence on the cold floor beneath it. And you called that love. You called it loyalty. You told yourself that's what a real man does. But here's the question you've been avoiding. While you were building her life, who was building yours? While you were rescuing her from the weight of her own choices, who was rescuing you from the emptiness you refused to face? You gave her everything and kept nothing for yourself. Dostoevsky didn't just write about pain. He wrote about the tragedy of men who hand over their souls, piece by piece, to people who never asked them to, not because they're evil, but because these men were too afraid to count the real cost of their devotion. You've been counting sacrifices, not outcomes. You thought you were building a future, but what you were really building was a prison brick by brick, blind to the fact that it was your own hands laying the foundation. You funded it with your effort. You mortgaged it with your years. You locked it from the inside with your fear of not being enough. You thought if you gave more, she'd stay. If you sacrificed more, she'd finally love you the way you longed to be loved. If you made her life easier, you'd somehow prove you were worthy of hers. But now you don't feel stronger. You don't feel like a man. You feel hollow. You feel used. You feel like someone who gave everything and forgot to keep anything for himself. And the hardest part, you didn't just allow it. You offered it willingly. So the only question left is this. Now that you've woken up to the truth, what are you going to do about it? He gave everything to be seen and lost himself in the process. You think you're being noble. You think you're proving your love. But what you're actually doing is vanishing slowly, silently, one compromise at a time. And no one notices until you've emptied yourself into a life that no longer feels like your own. This is the silent tragedy of many men, the gradual self-erasure that comes from living for the gaze of someone else, not for meaning, not for growth, but for recognition, for approval, for the fleeting warmth of a woman's admiration. On the surface, it looks like loyalty. Beneath, it's a deep, corrosive form of self-abandonment. Carl Jung warned us of the dangers of the unexamined self, the part of us that craves acceptance so deeply we build entire identities around being needed. For men, this often takes the form of self-sacrifice. They pour their lives into relationships, into fixing, into providing. Not because they're whole, but because they're terrified of being irrelevant. They become the builder of her throne. The man who gives everything in hopes that she might finally say, "You're enough." But she never will. And not because she's cruel, but because she can feel, on some unconscious level, that what he offers is not love, it's a transaction rooted in fear. He is not showing up as a sovereign man, but as a servant of validation. Jung called this a symptom of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, then project onto others. The man who neglects his own dreams, boundaries, and purpose to become the emotional savior of a woman is not practicing love. He is outsourcing his sense of self-worth. His sacrifice isn't sacred, it's strategic. It says, if I do enough for her, maybe I'll feel like I matter. And this is where the internal split begins. Outwardly, he becomes the reliable, loyal, selfless man. Inwardly, he becomes resentful, anxious, and lost. He begins to expect repayment, her loyalty, her submission, her worship, but none of that comes because she never asked him to disappear in the first place. Stoicism teaches us to care only about what we can control: our thoughts, our actions, our values. But when a man centers his life around earning someone else's recognition, he violates this principle completely. He hands over his peace to something external, something he cannot shape or predict. In doing so, he surrenders his sovereignty. You can see it in his eyes, in the way he hesitates before asking for what he wants, in the way he calls it support when he's really just hoping she doesn't leave, in the way he gives and gives, and gives not out of overflow, but out of emotional scarcity. He tells himself that this is what love is, that to be a man is to provide, protect, endure. But what he's really doing is spiritual suicide, as Dostoevsky called it, the slow, voluntary death of the soul in exchange for a fleeting sense of mattering. He builds her comfort while sitting on the cold floor of his own neglect, and society praises him for it. Good man, they say. She's lucky. But they don't see the internal decay. They don't see the cost, his fire, his joy, his ambition. They don't see that while she sits on the throne. He no longer knows where he belongs. Eventually, she senses it too, the imbalance, the desperation, and without ever needing to explain it. She pulls away, not out of malice, but instinct, because deep down, women do not respect men who abandon themselves, not even when they benefit from it. This is the beginning of the end, not of the relationship, but of his illusion, when he wakes up one day, bitter and confused, asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" The truth is, he never tried to be himself. He only tried to be what he thought she wanted, and in doing so, he lost her and himself. But this moment of realization, this shattering, is not the death of him. It's the invitation, the first real chance to break the mirror he's been performing in front of. The first time he can look inward and ask, "What do I want if no one is watching? Who am I without her eyes?" To live from the inside out is the only way forward. He must begin again, not by proving his worth to anyone, but by reclaiming it for himself. Jung's process of individuation demands it. The Stoic path demands it. Life demands it. This isn't about turning cold, it's about turning real. Let him sit with the silence he once feared. Let him build not her castle, but his own fortress of integrity. Let him speak truths without needing applause. Let him be seen first and foremost by himself. Because the man who no longer needs recognition is the man who commands it. You weren't loving her, you were betraying yourself. There's a myth many men carry, passed down like an unspoken code, that to love a woman is to sacrifice yourself, that to prove your worth, you must make her your world, that if you become the gravity holding everything together, you'll be rewarded with her loyalty, her admiration, her love. But what they discover, too late, is that this path rarely ends with respect. It ends with quiet resentment, slow burning exhaustion, and eventually being left behind. Because it was never love. It was servitude disguised as romance. From the outside, it's hard to distinguish the two. He buys the gifts, shows up every time, bends his needs, says yes when he means no. He calls it love. The world nods along, but inside, something starts to rot. His self-worth erodes, his fire dims, and he begins to feel it not in the big betrayals, but in the small silences, the smiles that don't reach her eyes, the way she stops asking what he wants. This is not because women are ungrateful, it's because they can sense when a man has made them his reason for existing, and that weight doesn't feel like love. It feels like pressure, like imbalance, like quiet emotional control disguised as care. Fyodor Dostoevsky, no stranger to psychological pain, wrote often of characters who destroyed themselves in the name of virtue. He called it self-betrayal, a soul-crushing exchange where a man gives up his truth to maintain the illusion of goodness. And in love, this betrayal becomes even more insidious, because the man believes his sacrifice is noble. He thinks suffering for her is what makes him valuable. But that's the lie. Carl Jung taught that anything we do to avoid confronting our own shadow will ultimately destroy us. And for many men, the shadow takes the form of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of facing life alone. So they cling, they adapt, they lose themselves in her reality, convincing themselves that if they just give a little more, she'll finally see them. But she won't, because the more he betrays himself to serve her emotions, the less he is himself. And women don't fall in love with empty men. They fall in love with men who stand firm in who they are, Not tyrants, not controllers, but anchored beings with missions, values, direction. A man without a spine, even if he's sweet, will never be magnetic. The Stoics were clear. Love must never come at the expense of self-respect. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If a man's thoughts revolve entirely around pleasing her, adapting for her, proving himself to her, his soul fades into dependency. It is not wrong to love deeply, but love that costs you your dignity is not love. It is a form of emotional slavery, and the price is high. Over time, you forget what you want, you defer your dreams, you tolerate disrespect, you explain away her coldness. You become so used to bending that standing up feels like conflict. This is not what you were made for. You were made to walk beside her, not behind her, not beneath her. When a man forfeits his purpose to orbit a woman's life, he doesn't earn her love, he forfeits her respect. And in relationships, once respect is gone, love is not far behind. The man who sacrifices everything for a woman in hopes of being enough is chasing a ghost. Not only the ghost of her affection, but the ghost of the man he used to be before he silenced himself. But here's the truth. You can return. You can call your power back. You can stop calling it being a good man when what you're really doing is abandoning your values. You can say, I love you, but I won't disappear for you. And that, paradoxically, is what will make her feel safe. Because deep down, a woman doesn't want a man who dies for her. She wants a man who lives so fully, so vividly, that his presence reminds her who she is. And to be that man, you must stop betraying yourself. You must stop shrinking your needs, numbing your opinions, editing your fire. You must be willing to lose people if it means keeping your soul. You must know that a love earned through erasure is not love, it's survival. The right woman doesn't need you to sacrifice your mission. She needs you to live it. Because when you do, your presence becomes a gift, not a burden. And she will follow not because you asked her to, but because your direction is clear. Let this be your vow. No more noble lies. No more self-abandonment in the name of love. The man who honors himself will never again confuse servitude with connection. Because when you choose truth over approval, you don't lose love. You finally make space for the real kind. The more you crave her validation, the more you vanish from yourself. He wakes up one morning next to someone who used to feel like a dream, and he feels nothing. Not love, not anger, just a bitter emptiness, a vague sense that somewhere along the way, he gave everything away and in return, lost himself. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly like fog seeping under a locked door. First, he gives a little his opinion, his boundaries, his time, then a little more his plans, his dreams, his voice, until one day, he's no longer a man with a life, but a man orbiting someone else's, and worse, he's proud of it, because he thinks this is what it means to be worthy. Carl Jung called this the danger of projection, when we assign our unmet needs to another person and make their approval the mirror in which we measure our worth. But the mirror lies, and eventually, so does the man, because he starts to pretend he's happy, pretend he doesn't need space, pretend her approval is all the oxygen he needs, and every act of pretending chips away at the core of who he is. This is what Dostoevsky meant by meaningless suffering, the kind of pain you endure not for growth or truth, but because you're too afraid to face your own emptiness. And that emptiness comes roaring in when the recognition stops, when she becomes distant, when the praise disappears. He spirals, not because he loves her so deeply, but because her attention was the scaffolding holding up his entire identity. The Stoics would call this slavery. Seneca warned that the man who depends on others for his sense of peace is never truly free. And no matter how much he accomplishes or how much he gives, if his soul depends on applause, he is shackled. But this isn't just philosophy, it's psychological law. The more a man abandons his authentic self in the pursuit of being loved, the more likely he is to end up invisible even to himself. You see it in his eyes when he talks about her. He doesn't say what he wants. He says what she likes, what makes her happy, what she needs. He builds his schedule around her, his finances around her, his future around her, and then, when she inevitably pulls away, he feels betrayed. But she's not the betrayer, he is. He betrayed himself the moment he traded truth for peace, the moment he mistook her approval for his mission, the moment he silenced his own needs for the sake of being chosen. And this is why the bitterness comes, not because she left, but because he knows deep down that he abandoned himself first. This kind of man lives in a loop. He seeks relationships not for love, but for identity. He feels most alive when he's needed, most seen when he's praised. But the moment that need fades, so does his sense of purpose, and in that void, the shadow grows. Jung taught that if we don't make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. The man who lives for recognition lives in reaction, not creation. He becomes what others need, never what he truly is. And over time, that erodes everything: joy, clarity, direction. He becomes the man who resents women, not because they hurt him, but because they no longer validate the mask he wore. So how does he escape? Not through withdrawal, not through coldness, but through radical reclamation. He must stop asking, "What do they think of me?" and start asking, "What do I think of myself?" He must stop waiting to be chosen and begin choosing his values, his voice, his vision. The Stoics tell us, focus only on what is within your control, and that includes your sense of worth. No one, not her, not society, not your past, gets to decide it for you. When he learns to live from this place, everything shifts. He no longer gives to be seen. He no longer speaks to be liked. He no longer needs to prove. He simply is rooted, clear, complete. And from this center, he attracts not out of hunger, but out of resonance. The right people begin to appear. The bitterness fades. The emptiness becomes purpose, because he is no longer living in performance. He is living in presence. So if you are the man who wakes up wondering, why does it all feel so hollow? Here is your answer. You've been living in someone else's mirror. Break it, stand in your own light, and finally see yourself. You were never meant to be a guest in someone else's kingdom. He looked around and saw nothing that felt like his. Not the apartment, not the routines, not the rhythms of the life he had co-constructed. Everything bore her name, her taste, her vision, and he was just a tenant, quiet, accommodating, useful, but replaceable. That's the brutal truth most men avoid until it's too late. They've spent years furnishing someone else's empire while letting their own foundations crumble. In the name of love, in the name of loyalty, in the name of partnership. But it wasn't partnership, it was postponement of themselves, of their purpose. Jung said the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of a parent. But for many men, the greatest tragedy is the unlived life of themselves, because somewhere along the way, they decided it was noble to delay their own dreams until someone else gave them permission to live. That's not nobility. That's spiritual negligence. This is where the lie begins. Once she's happy, I'll focus on me. Once the relationship is stable, I'll get back on track. But the track disappears. The longer you wait to build your life, the less you recognize yourself when you try to return. And soon, you're not leading, you're reacting. Not building, but balancing. Your life becomes a negotiation with someone else's needs. And every day that passes, you lose your edge. Marcus Aurelius warned us. A man must stand erect, not be kept erect by others. And yet too many men are leaning on comfort, on connection, on illusions of stability. They trade their sovereignty for a role. The helper, the provider, the emotional crutch. But a role is not an identity. And when that role no longer serves her, she leaves and you're left with nothing but a collapsed script. Responsibility is not just about paying bills or showing up. It's about direction, it's about clarity, it's about building something so rooted in who you are that no woman, no rejection, no loss can take it from you. Jung's concept of individuation is clear. The man must integrate his shadow, claim his destiny, and forge meaning from within. If he doesn't, he becomes what Jung called a puppet of collective expectations, a man shaped by the world, instead of shaping it. And nowhere is this more obvious than in relationships. where many men give away their mission in exchange for connection. But love that costs you your calling is a slow death. Let's be direct. A man without a mission is a man at risk, not just of being forgotten, but of forgetting himself. Because if he's not chasing something greater, he becomes consumed by the small, the arguments, the validation, the highs and lows of a dynamic that should never be the center of his life. He becomes dependent, and dependency breeds resentment, confusion, weakness. This isn't about being cold, it's about being complete. When a man takes full responsibility for building his life, his purpose, his health, his habits, something shifts, his energy changes. He walks into rooms differently. He speaks less but says more. He doesn't seek attention, he commands it, not through force, but through foundation. Women feel it, and they respond to it not with control, but with trust, because they sense that this man doesn't need them to validate him. He chooses them from fullness, not hunger, and that choice is powerful. This kind of man doesn't abandon love, but he refuses to abandon himself for it. He knows that love, at its best, is a union of two sovereigns, not a rescue mission, not a sacrifice. So where does it begin? It begins with building your kingdom. No matter how late, no matter how lost you feel, you start, you wake up earlier, you set a vision, you lift the weights, not just for your body, but for your spirit. You say no to what drains you. You stop asking for permission to want what you want. You let her world orbit yours, not because you demand it, but because you've built something worth orbiting. Because one day, you'll look around your life and the question will be simple. Did I build this for her or for me? And if the answer is you, you'll know peace and power. You want to be respected again. Start by keeping the promises you make to yourself. There comes a moment, a quiet, brutal one, when a man looks in the mirror and realizes, I don't respect myself anymore, not because of what anyone did to him, but because of what he allowed, the boundaries he didn't hold, the goals he let decay, the quiet voice inside he silenced for the sake of approval, comfort, or peace. This moment is sacred because it holds two choices: numb it or rise from it. Too many men keep numbing. They drink, they distract, they overwork, or they stay in relationships that no longer serve their soul just because starting over feels too terrifying. But a few, very few, make a different choice. They write a new sentence in the story of their life. No more. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but to become that man, you must stop living for others and start rebuilding what you've quietly let collapse. Your mission, your discipline, your presence, your values. And it doesn't begin with words. It begins with action. The first action: kill the savior complex. You are not here to fix her life, make her feel whole, or rescue her from her own wounds. That is not love, it is emotional slavery. Every time you rush to solve her problems while ignoring your own, you betray yourself. Let her face her own shadows. Let her grow. You're not a therapist with romantic feelings. You're a man with a purpose. And if you don't have a purpose yet, that's your first mission. Build it. Reclaim your health. Reconnect with your goals. Rewire your focus. Go back to the dream you buried because it didn't fit into her life. Go back to the version of you that used to want more than being liked. That man still lives inside you. Dig him out. You will feel empty at first. You'll feel lost. But Jung taught that this emptiness is not a flaw. It's the space where rebirth begins. What you're feeling isn't brokenness. It's potential uncloaked. Sit in that silence. Let it strip away every false identity you've worn to feel loved. And then act. Take the damn run. Open the book. Build the business. Say no to the draining conversation. Leave the room when your energy is being used as someone else's emotional crutch. And above all, do what you say you'll do. This is how you earn back your own respect. Not through affirmation, not through her "I miss you," not through external applause, but through the gritty, disciplined, unsexy work of consistency. You wake up and you show up for yourself, again and again, until you start believing you're worth it, not because someone told you so, but because your actions proved it. The Stoics were clear. Discipline is freedom. The more you honor your commitments to yourself, the less you depend on validation, and that is the seed of dignity. And then, only then, do you redefine your relationship with women, no longer as the desperate giver, no longer as the chameleon who morphs into what she wants. You become a man with boundaries, with fire, with direction. You seek not to be consumed by her emotions, but to be witnessed as you are. And you choose only those who can meet you there. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're building a life so full that the right woman feels like a compliment, not a savior, not a project, not a purpose. Because the moment you make yourself the project, the gym, the mind, the values, the daily system, you become magnetic, and not because you're trying to be, but because you're too rooted to chase. So if you're at rock bottom, good, that means the ground beneath you is solid enough to rebuild on. But this time, build differently, not from need, not from performance, not for anyone else's praise. Build from truth, brick by brick, with quiet integrity. Because every man must choose either continue living as a reaction to being unseen, or become the man who no longer needs to be seen to know he matters. Your collapse wasn't the end. It was the call to rise. Some men don't hit rock bottom with a bang. It's quieter than that. It's the slow death of the voice inside that once had vision. It's the subtle ache of waking up next to someone and realizing, I have no idea who I am anymore. It's not a scream, it's a whisper. And if he doesn't answer it, the emptiness grows louder. But here's the hidden truth. Collapse is not the end. It's a threshold, a breaking open of everything false to make room for what's real. Dostoevsky once wrote, "The darker the night, the brighter the stars." He understood that the greatest breakthroughs come when everything external has failed, and a man is left alone with nothing but his inner world, raw, trembling, and ready. Jung would call this the dark night of the soul, the period when all of a man's masks fall away. No more pretending, no more pleasing, no more grasping for a version of himself built on someone else's approval. In this darkness, something ancient begins to stir, the self, not the role, not the title, but the deep archetype of who he was always meant to be. But first, he must do something few men have the courage to do. He must admit the truth, that no one is coming to save him, that the love he chased was a distraction from the love he denied himself, that every moment he spent building someone else's dream while neglecting his own wasn't loyalty, it was fear. And that fear is what broke him, not her, not them, not the world. This is where the Stoic principle of radical responsibility comes in. Epictetus taught that we must accept reality without excuse and act from within. And the truth is, no woman, no praise, no apology will give him back the years he lost betraying himself. But the moment he accepts that no one else is to blame is the moment he stops bleeding and starts building. Rebirth begins when a man chooses to feel the shame without hiding, to sit in the silence without numbing, to stare at the ruins of his choices without self-pity, not because he's weak, but because only the man who owns the wreckage can rebuild with wisdom. And what he builds this time will be different. He doesn't chase love. He becomes love. He doesn't seek validation. He becomes so aligned with truth that recognition becomes irrelevant. He doesn't beg for peace. He creates it from discipline, from clarity, from letting go of everything that once defined him. This is not a motivational speech. This is a blueprint. You rise by doing the work no one applauds, by waking up before the fear does, by turning pain into pattern breaking, by no longer explaining your worth, by no longer negotiating with mediocrity. You rise by refusing to die in the life you settled for. And yes, it's hard. Your old self will cling. The world will test you. But if you stay the course, something wild happens. The pain that once paralyzed you becomes power. The silence that used to haunt you becomes sanctuary. And the man who once gave everything to be chosen becomes the man who chooses. From that space, real relationships are possible. Not codependent, not performative, but rooted in shared truth, in mutual growth, in deep respect. Because you're not showing up as a half man hoping she'll complete you. You're showing up full, and that fullness magnetizes the kind of love you never had to beg for. This is what it means to rise from the ashes, not to become who you were before, but to become who you were too afraid to be. A man with fire, with stillness, with vision. You didn't lose those years. You learned. You didn't break. You were forged. And now that the illusions have burned, you get to build again. But this time, in truth. So stand up, not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, but because it's who you were always meant to be. Make today the line in the sand, the day you stop waiting for approval and start earning your own respect brick by brick, decision by decision, moment by moment, because no woman, no friend, no family member can give you the worth you continue to deny yourself. If this message struck a chord, don't just scroll past it, make a declaration in the comments. Write, I choose to build myself first. Let it be known you're done playing small. And if you're ready to take this deeper, support this mission. Share this video with a man who's still lost in the noise, who needs to be reminded of who he could become. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss another wake-up call. And if you want to wear what you stand for, click the link in the description. The merch isn't just clothing, it's a signal, a reminder that you no longer live for validation, you live for alignment. Because as Dostoevsky once said, only real men will understand this path. Now it's your turn to show the world. You're one of them.